I think if you really love something, you don't think about that.
Yeah.
And I think that was, and to this day, with the podcasting stuff that I do now, my wife will say, man, you're putting in so much time. It doesn't feel like I'm putting in the time. It's something I just love to do. And yeah, you want to hustle and hopefully you can make some money off stuff, but it's not all about money, or there's a long tail. And where does that long tail lead? And it's how long can you sustain something? And I think that's with any project. You gotta really look at it and say, what's your end point? What's your goal? And if it no longer fits with what you're doing, then abandon it. And if you get some energy and inspiration and excitement out of these projects and you can sustain them, then do it. It's part of you. And I think it's really being honest with yourself. And I think it's all too often we're not honest enough with ourselves.
But how did you create, you got it down pat in those final sort of 3 to 4 years from what I can see, in that, you picked I was your sports guy or your fitness guy, and you picked them. But you had this, every time we picked up a mic, you had this really genuine excitement and passion and energy for it.
Guests who are also passionate. So you got people who care.
Yeah.
And to actually, you can only talk about things you care about. So if you look at all of the shows that I did, they were only ever about things I cared about.
Brilliant.
I never talked about stuff I didn't care about. And sometimes they would say, oh, can you get this person in? Or we want you to do this interview with this person. Those were the hardest ones, especially if there was no connection to it. It was just, oh, we're just going to do this. And I know a lot of media people, that's their job, and they just do interviews and upon interviews.
Horrendous.
I don't know. And you see it and hear it in some of their things because they just don't care and they don't know anything about it. And they've just got a list of questions. They've looked at the briefer and away they go. But this show was different because and I always used to say to anyone who came on, this is not business breakfast. So if you're expecting to get, a Tom Urquhart Tom wasn't doing the business breakfast then, I don't think. But if you're expecting to get Richard Dean and Brandy Scott, and I would always say, and this was also the time, I would say, if you're expecting those kind of questions, those nail you and you've got to answer in 25 words, that's not this show. This is the opposite of that show. This is start talking, keep going, and fill in every single nook and cranny and blank of what you're talking about. And as we get off track, I'll bring you back and I'll ask you some more questions, but just talk. And I think that was it. It was just this great conversation, and people relaxed because they realized, hold on, you're not trying to nail me on something. You're not trying to get a scoop. We're just having a conversation. But you still get the scoops down the road because people let down their guard and they just start talking, and you get, well, what's really going on? And
that's something that maybe you can do it in the more long form. I mean
that's where it works.
It's probably a bit unfair to Nightline or the podcasts that we've done are just chats. Whereas I think some, specifically radio, we need to get certain points across, and
different type of programming.
There is a commercial side of it, but that's where I always loved it, because you'd ask these, and I think sometimes I was a little bit caught off guard because you'd ask such a wide open question with no real expectation.
Let's see where it goes.
And I'm like, I know he wants me to say something, but this is so wide. But then there was always this skill that you had, like you said, you'll just try and bring things back to something that that's a hell of a skill, mate.
It's just listening, and you've got to know your stuff. So if we were talking about stretching or trigger point therapy, I remember that was a really big one. I mean, I went and read about trigger point therapy, and I had a whole bunch of notes, and then you start going, and I'm just thinking, oh, okay, this is, I see where he's going with that. Let's see if we can link it back to this other point here, and sustainable, exercise programs, or being obese and what you need to do with diet, etc. It was having all the basic information to be able to follow along where you're going and bring it back. And I think that's the key. And you got to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy talking about fitness or cars or medicine or cooking or
the doctors, they were another one.
Yeah, they were hilarious.
They were, weren't they?
Yeah. Sean Petherbridge and his Shireen, his wife. Yeah.
That's right. 50% of it is talking. It's the way we project our voice. It's the speed at which we talk, the energy which we give to our voice. You said it just there. A lot of it, and this is where you had this insane skill of playing with those mixing decks, looking at the clock.
Oh man, that clock was a killer.
And the clock's counting down and something's flashing in the studio. But you were listening at the same time, because I'd be sort of waffling on and I'd be thinking that I'm sort of supposed to be filling in some time, and then you just come straight back in and you'd be there because you've got this insane ability to listen. Where does that come from, and how does one cultivate that? Because generally we don't really listen that well these days, do we?
I think, everyone's got so much to say, and I think it's work. Like, you have to actively want to listen to people and realize, okay, people are going to say something. There's going to be something there. And not jump in. And look, I don't get it right all the time. And to this day, I'll get people on my podcast, I'll get comments and let them talk. So it's a challenge. But as soon as you trust that you don't have to just keep talking, get your question out, short and sweet, to the point, and then let your audience, your guest, fill in the blanks. It just becomes this great learning exercise for you. And you've got a whole audience who's listening to you. But if you keep in your mind that you're not doing it for the audience, really you're just doing it for yourself. And I used to say to people, I said, look, I'm doing this for me. It just happens we have a whole audience, but I just want to learn about these things. And I genuinely want to know more about this. So we're just having a conversation. And a bunch of other people are listening. Absolutely. But I'm doing this personally.